Hey everyone, it's Matt from Neewer, and today we're going to capture peak action using a high-speed drive setting on our camera. We're going to shoot like a burst of photographs, and we're going to sync those up with our flash units. So we're glad you're here. This is the Neewer Academy. All right, so we're in the studio today, and Autumn has agreed to join us. Autumn is a ballet dancer, and she's going to do a couple jumps for us that we can use to capture our peak motion, our peak action. So that's always been kind of a challenge for photographers, is as soon as a motion is right at the perfect point, for Autumn, it would really be kind of these poses at the height of these jumps. That's hard to get when you're just trying to time it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of cheat. We're gonna use the drive settings on our camera so we can just hold down the button and capture a series of images very quickly. And we're gonna time those with our flashes. So we can just hold that down, we get a burst of photos, we get a burst of synchronized flash, and we can then look at those and pick the best shot. So we'll get Autumn to rehearse a couple jumps, and then we will get our lights set up, and then we'll get some cool photos. All right, so in order to get started, what we need to do is, number one, figure out our framing, our background, and number two, kind of figure out where our lights are going to be. So I like to think of this kind of from the final photograph forward. For this one, we want just a perfect black background. I want Autumn's jumps, kind of that pose, really isolated against that black background. So I've got this backdrop behind us. This is a 10-foot black backdrop. 10 feet sounds big. As soon as you get this up and start jumping, it actually feels very small. So we've positioned Autumn very close. We're probably only about 2 feet away from this backdrop. That way we can shoot our frame, really fill it with as much of that background as possible. We've marked the floor here so Autumn can jump on that mark. And that way we know exactly where our focus is going to be. This gives you an easy spot to kind of, get everything started, and we can light that area. But we don't know the height of our lights right now, so that's what we're going to figure out. So Autumn's going to do one of her poses. I think we're going to do 3 eventually. 1 is fine right now. I just want to watch this jump and kind of see where the peak of her jump is. And wherever that spot is, that's where we kind of want to meter and get our lights. So go ahead and do one of your jumps, and let's just take a look. Perfect. Very cool. So you're coming up. I'd say your head ends up right about here. So yeah, we'll light this area. That's awesome. Okay, you don't have to wait around for the lighting. We have to wait for it, but you don't have to stand here. So what we're gonna do now, we'll say bye to Autumn for a minute, and we'll start bringing the lights in. All right, so let's talk about our flashes really quick. I'm using 2 of these Neewer Q4 units. Both of these guys are set up on C-stands. Anytime I send a light high up, I like to use a C-stand, especially if I'm going to be putting anything in front of it that might weigh it in one direction or another. Light stands are nice for panel lights, like our RGB panel lights and stuff. Anytime you get some heavier duty stuff, especially this diffusion, I like putting them on C-stands with sandbags. So that's what you see here. You'll also notice I've got honeycombs on the fronts of these soft boxes. The honeycomb is this kind of grid lattice thing on the front. This just gives us a little bit more direction to the light. Sometimes just the softbox can kind of spill out. And when I'm going to be putting my lights this close to my background, I really want as much direction out of these as I can get. The big reason is because I don't want this light to spill onto the background. So we're actually going to take a couple little precautions against that. The first is honeycombs. So both of these lights have the same thing, a softbox and a honeycomb. And we measured right where Autumn was jumping. And honestly, it's about my height. So that's kind of what I'm going to light for. So this guy's up a little high, this guy's a little low. They're both way too close. So what I'm going to do right now is just move these out to the sides, point them inward, get the height right where I want it. And then we can start metering and we can start looking at the power of these. So first things first, let's get them in position. All right, so I got my lights set up. I've moved them vertically, so they're going to be lighting right where Autumn is going to be for her peak, action or peak of her jump. The only thing is I am concerned about these lights spilling onto my background. That's one of the reasons why we're using side light and not bringing something in from like 3/4 up front is because that light would spill off onto our background. So we've got our honeycombs to give a little direction, but I still think this is going to hit this background. So I've got a C-stand here with some duvetine stretched on it. Duvetine is just like a heavy kind of cloth material. It really soaks up light. And I'm just going to bring these on the sides of both of my lights just to kind of cut any light that might spill on that background out of there. Really just want a nice black background. So I'm going to get those set up, and then we can start metering for our flash. All right, so our lights are all set up. You can see my duvetine on my C-stand on either side. I'm just going to use that like barn doors, so if I do see a little bit of spill on my background, I can bring those guys in and out. You can see I've got a Q Pro trigger and my light meter. So the Q Pro is just going to go onto the hot shoe of my camera, and every time I press the shutter, this is going to send that signal out to my flashes. So really, really handy. I really recommend one of these. And I've got it off camera right now so I can use it with my light meter to dial in my settings. So speaking of my settings, it gets a little complicated because we want to make sure that these flashes are at a power that they can fire a nice burst of flashes. So if they're powered up too high, the refresh won't let you just shoot, hold down the trigger and pop, 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 pop really fast. I did a little experimenting. I think this is going to vary depending on people's power settings, their camera's drive speed, their shutter speed, stuff like that. With what I'm shooting at, 250th of a second, these guys were firing 5 flashes at a 30-second power. So I really like having 5 frames to choose from. If you want a higher power on your flash, you would just have a smaller burst. 5 frames is great, that gives me a lot to choose from. So I want these guys set to a maximum of 30-second power. Any higher than that, and I won't be able to get all those shots I need in my burst. So I'm going to set them there, get my readings. I know I'm shooting at, I want like an f8, f11. f8 would be great. That gives me all the depth that I need. So really my variable here could be my ISO or my aperture. Shutter speed doesn't really matter when you're shooting with a flash. So I'm going to start metering. I'm going to see where we get, and I'm either going to adjust my aperture or my ISO to make everything work. So I'm set here at a 30-second power. Let me get my guy set. I'm shooting ISO 400 right now, 250th. So let's just see where we're at. All right, so that's a 5.6. So 5.6 is probably a little too shallow for what I want. I want 8. If I can get an 8, I'll be happy. That's at ISO 400. So if I stop that up to ISO 800, that's going to be right at an f8. I can see it in there, but we might as well double check. Yeah, 569, so that's an f8. So that makes me really happy. So that's our first flash. Our second one is the same distance away. Let me just turn it on here, and that should be the same reading. Yep, f8. Cool. So that was really easy. So we're at an f8, 250th of a second, ISO 800. These guys are at 30-second power. I know that'll work great for my burst. So my lights are set up, our frame is set up, we're really ready to go. So I'm going to call Autumn back in, and we're going to hold down the trigger as she's at her peak, and we'll look and see what we get. So that was a really fun shoot. You could see that as Autumn was reaching the pinnacle of those jumps, that's when I'm holding down that shutter, letting the drive just capture those photographs. The flashes are firing off in sync, and that gives me a nice little selection for each one of those jumps to kind of choose that peak action. So this is a really great technique for getting that one moment. You don't have to try to time it. You just kind of let the camera do the work. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.